So, if you guys don't know, very recently I have finally finished watching a show that for years people have told me, why haven't you seen? How are you a fan of TV and you haven't seen the show? I finally watched Breaking Bad, I wanted to watch it for the longest time, but because of this certain movie that was coming out, I figured that it'd be the perfect time to do it. And originally, I was planning on doing a full series review for Breaking Bad. I was going to do it before this movie came out, but because of the fact that it took me so long to finish this, which I started this all the way back in October, and I didn't finish it until last week, really just because life and other things really got in the way. The Scorsese binge especially took up a considerable amount of time. I just really didn't have the time to finish the show until last week. And so I watched it, and it very quickly became one of my favorite series of all time, for sure. And look, unfortunately, because of the fact it took me so long, I'm not going to be doing a full series review of Breaking Bad. I really would love to, but I just don't really have the time and things like that. And if you guys want to see, I mean, I reviewed every single season on my Facebook. I logged them on there. You guys can check them out. I'll probably link them down below. You guys can see my review for really every single season, what I like, what I dislike, all that kind of stuff. There's very little that I do dislike. I think it's pretty much a perfect show. Definitely in my top 5 for sure. Probably either number 2 or 3. Leftovers is still the GOAT, but Breaking Bad definitely comes pretty close for sure, especially with episodes like Ozymandias and The Fly. Oh, just so good. But again, with that out of the way, it does not at all stop me from, even though I'm, not reviewing Breaking Bad, I feel like because, I've waited this long and because my original goal was to watch this watch this series and then watch this movie so I could finally review it for you guys, I am finally going to do that, especially since it recently aired on AMC. It gives me the perfect opportunity to finally review this film, review the highly anticipated El Camino Breaking Bad movie. Now, real quick, guys, I'm just going to warn you that from here on out, I'm going to give full spoilers for both Breaking Bad and parts of El Camino, not the whole film, but I'm going to, just because it's been so long and there's so much that I want to talk about, I feel like it's a hard movie to really review without getting into spoilers, so, I'm just going to get right into it. So basically what this movie's about, if you guys don't know, it takes place literally right after the events of Breaking Bad. Jesse has now been set free by Walt after all of his horrific captivity with the neo-Nazis, and basically he is at a point where he's trying to start anew, but he doesn't really know how to do that, and especially with a very traumatic past that is really haunting him throughout the film, he's doing everything he can to try to start off with a clean slate and hopefully rid himself of everything bad that's happened within the past year, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, understandably, I was pretty excited for this film, especially ending Breaking Bad. I do think that the way the show ends, it does actually set up the events of this movie quite well, with Jesse riding off into the sunset. And yes, while that is a very satisfying ending of itself, for sure, there's a lot that they could have done. There's a lot that you think about, okay, where could he have gone? I mean, even if you watch Vince Gilligan's, original interview of the finale, he talks about how he always kind of knew, where Jesse was going. In his mind, he knew how this whole thing was going to play out. And so, it's really interesting to see him come back to it all these years later and finally have this conclusion. And considering that for me, Jesse was always my favorite character. Walt is definitely the better written character, but Jesse was always my favorite. I was very excited to see how this film would turn out, and overall, I thought this film was really good. I don't think that it's amazing. I don't think it's on the level of the show, really. I'll say that right now. And I also don't think it's the most necessary film in the world, but I do think for what it is, it really does a good job of wrapping up this story, reminding us of what we loved about the show, but also trying to explore new territory, and I think overall it does a good job with that. Now, right off the bat, something that was always a consistent in Breaking Bad, of course, was the acting. I mean, every performance was just so top-notch in that show, and this film is really no different, especially when it comes to Aaron Paul, who really carries this entire thing. I mean, he's always been phenomenal in the show, and I really do think that, Bryan Cranston, yes, he is one of the best performances of all time, but I also feel Aaron Paul is just as deserving of that title, and very much the case here, too. I mean, you really do see how much, pain Jesse is in throughout this movie, how he's been affected by the events of what went down in Breaking Bad, and you really do see how this has gotten to him, but he also is a lot more full of wisdom. He's a lot more careful with what he's doing. There's a considerable amount of growth for this character, and I just thought Paul represented all of that so well here, especially when it comes to the scenes where it's a lot more quiet. I feel like that's something that a lesser actor wouldn't be able to pull off as well. For example, there's a great scene where he first finds out about Walt's death, and when he gets note of it, his reaction is so subtle in the movie, and most actors, I don't think, would be able to pull it off quite as well as Paul does here, but it really does show the level that he's on as an actor, and I gotta say, between this and BoJack Horseman, Aaron Paul is very quickly becoming one of my favorite character actors working today. He's one of those actors that is just able to completely disappear into a role, and he absolutely does that here. He continues to demonstrate just how great of an actor he is here, and, it's one of those things where it's always risky to return to a role after all these years, but it really felt like nothing had changed. I mean, Paul really does not miss a beat here, giving absolutely one of his best performances that he's given in the show so far. I don't know if it is his best, because I do think that Jesse seasons 3 through 5 are collectively his best performance, but I do think that this definitely does come pretty close for sure, and I thought he was absolutely phenomenal here. In terms of directing, I mean, I don't think I really need to get into this very much at all. Vince Gilligan is absolutely one of the best out there in terms of tone, in terms of style. He's one of the true visionaries, I think, in terms of just, being a showrunner. And the way he's able to translate that to film is almost seamless. He does a really good job at making this feel like an episode of Breaking Bad, but also making it feel a little bit more cinematic in that way. And I thought he did a pretty good job with that. And what I especially loved is that he didn't try to make this a huge, big, epic film. He made this far more restrained, far more quiet, and that's something that you rarely see in something like this. Rarely when a show comes back or some piece of entertainment comes back, they try to go all out. They try to make the most crazy thing possible, and Gilligan didn't do that. She shows a lot of restraint, and it shows that this is an idea that he's had for a while now. In his eyes, this was always the conclusion of Jesse's story. This is not something that he just came up with at the last minute. He's always had this planned, and it's really refreshing to see, and I thought he did a really good job with that for sure. The film is definitely considerably darker than some of Breaking Bad. Not the last season. The last season is just continuous darkness for sure. This is definitely much more, I would say, of a contemplative, very careful character study, and I think he does a really good job with that directing-wise here, but also retaining some of the fun of the original movie. He's got some really good comic relief with Skinny Pete and Badger, which I really did appreciate. There's some really nice callbacks to things, and I thought overall his directing here was just really great, and definitely not one of my flaws at all, because I think his directing here is really spectacular. And the writing here also is still really great. Again, I can very much tell that Vince Gilligan has had this plan since the beginning. And I think especially the way that he gives us this more introspective study of Jesse is important, because that's not something we really got to see in the original show, because it was focused squarely on Walt. Yes, Jesse was the second main character, but he was always, second. This was Walt's story. And this, of course, is much more of Jesse's story. So we're able to get a much more intimate view of who Jesse is, what he's been through, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's something that he did really well, particularly the way he hones in on Jesse's PTSD, I thought was masterfully done, because Jesse in the beginning of this film, he's just as crazy and he's just as energetic as he was at the end of the show. Remember, he was like screaming when he was, when he finally got out of that situation, when Walt finally set him free after everything that's happened to him after the past few months. He felt so relieved, but he also was terrified because he didn't really think he'd get out of the situation. He thought for sure that he'd die there. And so the way that he's almost feral in the beginning of this movie, I thought was a very, very smart choice. And the way that as the film goes on, his PTSD really does start to hurt him. There's just little things that something like him taking a shower, reminding him of him being waterboarded, by the neo-Nazis, I thought was so effective and really does show how, even though Jesse is trying to outrun his past, there's certain things that are just always going to have a long-lasting impact on him. He's never going to forget what's happened. He's never going to be able to fully overcome what's happened, but the film is really about him trying to move on, trying to be able to gradually get that fresh start. And I thought the way the film portrayed that idea was very strong, but particularly seeing the pain that he went through, because we already know a lot of what happened to Jesse with the Nazis, but this film really gets into the full extent of what went down, and it is absolutely disgusting when you get to see it, especially when it comes to the character of Todd, who we really do get to see just how much of a psychopath this guy really was. I mean, he was very much a manipulator in that way. He was someone that treated Jesse almost like his pet in that way, and it's really hard to watch, but I thought they did a really good job with the way they handled those flashbacks and things like that. And again, I thought those flashbacks were really strong, whether it was the stuff with Todd or this brutal scene with him where he has to basically run as fast as he can into like this metal bar with like the thing that he's like strapped to. It's really, really gruesome, and they definitely did not hold back on that at all, and I thought they did a really good job with that. But the film also does a really excellent job of showing who Jesse used to be, whether it's his, and again, this is where I felt like I had to talk spoilers because you guys knew this was coming. His flashback with Walt, I think, was very much necessary. I think it's probably one of the best scenes in the movie because it shows the potential that Jesse once had, how he could have had a much different life without Walt, and Walt is really the person that set him down this dark path. He could have gone to college, he could have gotten out of this, and unfortunately, that's just not the case, and I think this film does a really good job of telling that story, showing how far Jesse has come from then, but also how far he's really fallen, and I think that stuff is definitely very strong. Getting to the things that are an issue, though, is that most of the things that I just told you this film does really well are in the flashbacks. I think all the flashbacks in this movie are phenomenal. I don't think there's a single one that's wasted. I don't think there's a single one that's unnecessary. I think they do a really good job, using these flashbacks. And yes, sometimes they may rely on them a little bit too much, but I think the ones we get, they give us a lot of good insight into what Jesse's been through and show us some things that we really didn't know. But my biggest problem at first with this movie is that, aside from those flashbacks, it wasn't really telling us anything that new about the Jesse character. The movie, I thought, was at first really strong. When he got to Skinny Pete and Badger, and they saw him all bloody and battered and things like that, they saw him with the beard, and they barely even recognized him, I thought was really strong stuff. But once he went away, I'm not gonna lie, the present stuff really slowed down for me. I wasn't as into what was going on there. But after a certain revelation occurs, that's when I realized, okay, now I get what they're trying to do with this film. Now I get what the whole point of this really is. And I think after that point, the film gets really great after that, because you realize this movie is not about, inevitability. It's not about just the darkness Jesse's been through. It's how he can really get out of it. And it's a really great stark contrast to Walt's end. Walt was someone who started off having a very humdrum life, but it was a pleasant one. It wasn't one that he felt that he was, really satisfied in, but he had a loving family. He had all these friends, he was in a good place. But because he came Heisenberg, even though that did up his confidence, and even though that did make him feel much more alive than he ever did, it ruined basically everything else around him. Every other thing that was important to him was destroyed because of it. And that really was his fault. Every single thing that happened to Walt, he absolutely had coming to him. There isn't a single thing that I can think of, minus maybe a few. Obviously, his cancer wasn't one of them. But aside from that, maybe, there wasn't a single thing that happened to Walt that wasn't really something that was his doing. You can't really say that for Jesse. Jesse is really just an innocent kid that was blackmailed into this and hasn't really been able to escape. He's wanted to escape for a while. In fact, when Jesse got severely hurt in season 3, and he tells Walt how he's, destroyed his life, I thought that he was going to take a break from him for a little bit, but he always got pulled back in. And now that Walt's finally gone, you realize that this whole movie is basically saying that Jesse finally has that opportunity to start over. He finally has an opportunity to overcome all of that darkness. And I think that's a great message for people, because we don't really get to see that. We don't really get to see someone go down this really dark path and then be able to pull themselves out of it. And truth be told, I don't think Jesse will ever be able to fully pull himself out of this. But I think what the film is really trying to say is that Jesse is going to find a way to get over this. Jesse is going to find a way to move on. He's going to find a way to begin again. And whatever that is, he has a bright future waiting for him. And that was just so great to see. I love the way things really did wrap up when it came to this movie. I really don't think they could have ended it any better way than they really did here, especially with the stuff with Jane at the end. And, she talks about all this future that she had, and I truthfully do think that Jane is the person that Jesse wanted to spend the rest of his life with, and even even years later, he's still very much thinking of her. He now finally does start to begin that life, even though it's not what he may have hoped. You notice at the end of this movie, he leaves with a smile. In the finale, he's tense. He's just extremely, on edge, and you can see that he's like terrified because of what's happened to him. He feels very tortured. But here, he finally feels satisfied, and I think that really was the perfect way to wrap things up here. And I think the perfect example of that contrast is, when you get to that scene where Jesse is surrounded by all of these guys that were responsible for the neo-Nazis' torture, everything that's left of them, you're expecting this huge, sort of, shootout to happen, kind of like what went down in the Breaking Bad series finale with Walt, where he showed no mercy, he came in with an M60, and he just annihilated everyone. But Jesse is not like that. Jesse is far more, he cares more about people. He has a sense of humanity still. He hasn't been stripped of that entirely. And so that scene that goes down, what's so effective about it, I think, is that he doesn't kill everyone. He lets some of them free. He only kills the ones that have wronged him. He only kills the ones that he feels need to die. He kills the ones in self-defense. I mean, the one guy that tried to shoot him, he only killed him because, well, he tried to shoot him. He didn't kill anyone else. He just let them go, and then he just burnt what they had left to the ground. He didn't want to kill anyone, innocent. And that's something that Jesse was always very firm with. He is a man of his morals. He doesn't just kill because he can. He kills when he absolutely needs to. And I think he's on a path where he doesn't want to have to kill ever again. He doesn't want to have to do that anymore. He doesn't want to have to take these drastic measures. He wants to be able to live a normal life. He wants at least some semblance of one. And I think that whole shootout scene is the perfect example of that. And when I'm talking about Aaron Paul's really restrained acting, that's really the scene that I'm talking about, is just how restrained he was there. I feel like any other actor would have gone all out, but I thought he did a really good job of showing how how just calm Jesse is throughout this whole situation, because he knows he's going to be able to get out of this. He just wants to be able to handle this as calmly as possible, and I thought they did a really good job with that. So again, I do think that the writing here is very strong. I think there's some great callbacks to Jesse's character overall. The cinematography here, like I said, is fantastic. They did a really great job, I think, of really remembering the depth that Breaking Bad had, but also giving this a voice of its own. It looks far more cinematic. They really do go all out with that, and I thought there were just some absolutely gorgeous shots here. Just shots of Jesse driving and things like that, I just thought were really well handled here, and I thought they did a really good job with that for sure. The score, definitely, there's much more of a score here than there was in Breaking Bad, and I definitely really did like the score here for sure. And the editing, like I said, I do think that the first half of this movie is a bit too slow for my liking, but once we got to that second act, I think the film really does take off after that. I think it got really great, and I thought that it was definitely very well paced in that way. Again, going back to my flaws, there are really only two others that I have. One is that I do not think that this has the momentum of the last few episodes of Breaking Bad. You just don't feel that urgency as much as you should, because Jesse is on the run, pretty much. He's trying to, you know, do what he can to start again. He's trying to run away from the law. And I just feel that they could have done a better job with that momentum. I think a big mistake was cutting out that scene with Skinny Pete that we saw in the teaser. I don't know why that wasn't in the actual movie. I think it's kind of weird that they just omitted it entirely, because, and I get it that they probably want Skinny Pete's last scene to talk about how Jesse was, like, his hero and things like that. But I think they could have done a better job with maybe upping the momentum up a little bit. And my only other complaint is that there's not a single mention of Andrea in this entire movie. Yes, we do get that letter with Brock at the end, but I mean, Jesse literally watched Andrea die in front of his eyes. She was gunned down in front of him, and so considering how much he cares about people and how much someone like Jane, who, yes, I do think that he loved Jane way more than he did Andrea. I think she was way more important to him. Andrea was still someone he had a relationship with, and so the fact that that's not brought up once, I just found to be a little odd, and I feel like having a movie about Jesse, that was an opportunity that was just a bit of a missed one. I also will say, a lot of people have brought this up, but yes, Jesse Plemons in this movie is significantly fatter than he was in the TV show. So yes, there are points where you see Todd and you do notice it. To be honest though, I didn't really notice it until I started to see people complain about it. Once I saw complaints, I'm like, okay, yeah, he definitely does. Once you see a side-by-side, yeah, he definitely does look different. But for me, I was so riveted by those scenes and just so repulsed by everything that Todd was doing that I didn't really care about that. I cared much more about just the horrific treatment that Todd was giving Jesse. And that's the thing that's always been so scary about Todd for me, is that nothing really phases him. Nothing. Like, there could be a mass shooting that happens, like, in his town, and he wouldn't be phased at all. He would be completely fine with it, because nothing really gets to this character. He is completely emotionless at all times in that way, and that's what made him, I think, such a terrifying presence. And same with this. I mean, something as simple as him literally just killing his fucking housekeeper, just because of something very trivial, and he has no reaction to it. It's terrifying, and that's something that Breaking Bad has always done very well, is subtle reactions, is they don't try to make it too over the top. You're terrified of this guy because literally nothing gets to him, and I think that that's something that Plemons still did an excellent job with. So despite the fact that, yes, he is definitely a lot less skinnier here, and Todd definitely looks significantly older, it didn't really bother me, because Plemons still is phenomenal in this role. He still very much understands this character, and I still think they did a really good job with that here. But I have to say, for what El Camino is, it very much does deliver, I think. Between Aaron Paul's amazing performance, especially showing how much the character has grown, delving more into some of the traumatic stuff of Jesse's captivity, especially the stuff with Todd, which I thought was really well done. You know, the way the film wraps things up, the way it shows the person that Jesse was versus who he is now, and then the contrast between him and Walt, even though Walt's not there, you know, his spirit really does loom over this entire thing. Really, El Camino, even though, like I said, I do think this is a film that didn't necessarily need to be made, I think for what it is overall, it's a very satisfying conclusion to Jesse's character. It definitely gives you what you want, I think, out of it overall, and though I do think that it did miss a few opportunities, at the end of the day, I was very satisfied with the way things did wrap up here. I think that definitely Vince Gilligan did a really good job in finishing out the story. I'm very happy that he was able to finish out the story, and I really couldn't have asked for anything more than what it was. And so overall, I am going to give El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie, overall a B. It's kind of funny because going into this movie, I expected this to be one of those films that I am really frustrated that I didn't finish early enough because it would have ended up on my best list, but actually that's not the case. So I'm actually not upset that I didn't love this movie in the way that I wanted to, because I'm not frustrated. I'm not at all frustrated that, you know, I did this before my best list, because it definitely would not have been on there. It's still a really good movie, and I do really like what it did, but it's not best list material, which is actually a good thing in hindsight. It's rare that I'd say that. It's rare that I'd say I'm glad I don't love this movie, but I am, because I don't feel like I, you know, missed out on putting this on my best list. You know, because of me not finishing Breaking Bad in time. It's perfectly fine that I didn't do that, because I don't absolutely love this movie enough to put it on there anyway. So that is a good thing. Again, guys, I really do apologize for not being able to review the entirety of Breaking Bad. Trust me, I wanted to do a full review, and I'm going to be reviewing Better Call Saul weekly. I'm currently binging the 4th season, and you guys will get my review of that and the first 2 episodes of Season 5. So that's probably going to make up for it, because now there's a lot more things that I have more of a connection to, like Gus, and when Hank is going to show up this season, that's going to have way more of an effect on me than it would have if I had not seen Breaking Bad. So I do think it is going to make up for it. It's just unfortunate that I didn't get to do a full series review, but despite that, I still hope you guys really did enjoy this video. Let me know what you guys thought of El Camino overall, left your thoughts in it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.